Somewhere in the digital archives of the Library of Congress, buried among millions of forgotten texts from America's past, sit 3 books that have become the subject of one of the most perplexing conspiracy theories of the modern age. These are not recently discovered manuscripts or hidden documents that suddenly came to light. They have been sitting there, available to anyone who cared to look, for over a century. Yet it took the internet age and a series of impossible coincidences to bring them into the spotlight. The books were written by a man named Ingersoll Lockwood, an American lawyer and novelist who lived in the late 1800s. He was not a particularly famous author during his lifetime, nor did his works achieve any significant commercial success. He wrote children's adventure stories, the kind that were popular among young readers of the Victorian era. His books featured fantastical journeys, exotic locations, and the kind of imaginative storytelling that transported children away from their everyday lives. Nothing about his work suggested that it would become relevant more than a century after his death. Between 1889 and 1896, Lockwood published 3 specific books that have now captured the attention of millions. The first was released in 1890 under the title Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog Bulger. It told the story of a wealthy young boy who embarks on extraordinary adventures. The second book, published in 1893, continued the tale with Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey. The third book, released in 1896, took a completely different turn. It was called 1900, or The Last President, and it abandoned the whimsical children's adventure format for something much darker and more politically charged. The protagonist of the first 2 books is a boy named Wilhelm Heinrich Sebastian von Trump, though he goes by the simpler name of Baron Trump. In Lockwood's description, Baron is a peculiar child. He is wealthy beyond measure, living in a castle that bears his family name. He possesses what he himself refers to as a massive intellect, and he has a tendency to look down upon those around him with barely concealed disdain. The boy is restless, always seeking the next adventure, the next challenge to prove his superiority. He travels the world with his dog, a loyal companion named Bulgar, and he encounters strange lands and stranger people. Baron Trump's adventures begin in the most unexpected of places. According to Lockwood's narrative, the boy discovers a portal to another world while traveling through Russia. This portal becomes his gateway to realms beyond normal human experience. Throughout his journeys, Baron is guided by a mysterious figure known only by the honorific Don, a title of respect used in Spanish and Italian cultures. This guide leads Baron through his most perilous adventures and teaches him secrets that no ordinary child could comprehend. The parallels to the real Trump family became impossible to ignore once people began examining these texts in detail. Donald Trump's youngest son is named Baron Trump. The spelling differs by only 1 letter. Donald Trump lived for decades in Trump Tower, a massive building that served as both his home and the headquarters of his business empire. In the 1980s, when Donald Trump was building his real estate empire and cultivating his public image, he frequently called journalists while posing as a publicist. The name he used for this fake publicist was John Barron. These connections could be dismissed as simple coincidence if they stood alone. After all, Barron is not an uncommon name, and Trump Tower is simply a building named after its owner, a common practice in real estate. But the coincidences do not end there. They multiply in ways that become increasingly difficult to explain away. The books describe Baron Trump living in Castle Trump, a massive estate befitting his family's wealth and status. The real Baron Trump grew up in the penthouse of Trump Tower, a 3-story apartment adorned in gold leaf and marble, occupying the top floors of a building that dominated the Manhattan skyline. The description of the fictional Baron as someone with a massive intellect who frequently boasts about his intelligence mirrors public statements made by Donald Trump throughout his career, statements in which he has referred to his own intelligence, his education at prestigious schools, and his natural abilities. The second book takes Baron Trump on an underground journey, a descent into worlds beneath the surface of ordinary reality. The narrative becomes increasingly strange, filled with encounters that push the boundaries of imagination. Yet threaded through this fantastical tale are moments that seem oddly prophetic, descriptions that feel too specific to be entirely coincidental. If those 2 books had stood alone, they might have remained curious footnotes in literary history. But Lockwood wrote a third book, And it is this final work that transforms the entire narrative from amusing coincidence into something that demands serious consideration. 1900, or The Last President abandons the fantasy elements of the Baron Trump stories. Instead, it presents a political drama set in New York City. The narrative opens on a November evening, right after an election that has shocked the nation. A populist candidate, someone the political establishment never took seriously, has won the presidency against all odds. The narrative describes the reaction in vivid detail. The streets of New York erupt in chaos. Crowds gather throughout the city, their faces twisted in disbelief and rage. The protests turn violent as anarchists and socialists take to the streets, their voices rising in fury. They march toward the wealthy neighborhoods, threatening to storm the mansions of the rich and redistribute their wealth by force. The police struggle to maintain order as the city teeters on the edge of complete breakdown. Lockwood's narrative focuses particularly on Fifth Avenue, one of New York's most prestigious streets. The text specifically mentions that a hotel on Fifth Avenue would be the first target of the angry mobs. This is not a vague reference to wealthy neighborhoods in general. Lockwood names the specific street and describes the hotel that would bear the brunt of the public's rage. Fifth Avenue is exactly where Trump Tower stands today. When Donald Trump won the 2016 presidential election, defeating Hillary Clinton in an outcome that shocked political analysts and pollsters worldwide, the protests that followed looked remarkably similar to Lockwood's description. Crowds gathered in cities across America, but particularly in New York. Many of these protesters marched along Fifth Avenue, and some attempted to reach Trump Tower itself. For those ready to dig deeper into this mystery, understanding the full scope of these connections requires examining not just what Lockwood wrote, but who examined the secrets that might have made such knowledge possible. The story continues beyond these peculiar books, reaching into the private papers of one of history's most enigmatic inventors and the government scientist chosen to analyze them. The third element that transforms this from simple literary coincidence into genuine mystery appears in Lockwood's political drama. Among the characters who populate The Last President, one particular name stands out. Serving in a position of authority alongside the populist president is a man whose surname is Pence. The character's role in the story mirrors, in eerie ways, the role of a vice president. Michael Richard Pence served as the 48th Vice President of the United States under Donald Trump from 2017 to 2021. He was a conservative former governor of Indiana, chosen to balance Trump's outsider image with establishment credentials. The fact that Lockwood, writing in 1896, chose to include a character named Pence in a position of power alongside his fictional populist president adds another layer to an already complex web of coincidences. Critics of the time traveler theory are quick to point out the elements of Lockwood's books that do not match reality. The Baron Trump books are filled with fantastical elements that have no connection to the modern Trump family. Giant turtles carry the protagonist through underground caverns. Alternate dimensions filled with strange creatures appear throughout the narrative. A frozen man, suspended in time with an eternal smile on his face, becomes a recurring symbol. These elements, skeptics argue, demonstrate that people are simply cherry-picking the details that fit while ignoring everything that does not. This criticism has merit. Confirmation bias is a powerful force, particularly in the age of the internet where theories can spread faster than careful analysis. The human mind is naturally inclined to find patterns, even in random data. Psychologists call this phenomenon apophenia, and it explains much of our fascination with conspiracy theories and mysterious coincidences. Yet even the skeptics must acknowledge that the coincidences themselves are real. The books exist. The names match. The descriptions align in ways that seem to transcend simple chance. Whether these facts point to something extraordinary or simply represent the kind of random correlation that is inevitable in a world filled with billions of data points remains an open question. The key to understanding this mystery may not lie in the books themselves, but in what happened decades after they were written, when a brilliant inventor died in a New York hotel room and the United States government sent in a team to secure his papers. Among those who entered that room was a man whose relationship to Donald Trump would later become another piece of this elaborate puzzle. The inventor who died in that hotel room was Nikola Tesla, a man whose name is synonymous with genius, innovation, and mysteries that continue to perplex researchers decades after his death. To understand why the government treated his papers with such urgency and why the connection to the Trump family matters, One must first understand who Tesla was and what he claimed to have discovered. Tesla was born in 1856 in what is now Croatia, then part of the Austrian Empire. From his earliest years, he demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to visualize complex mechanical systems in his mind. He could design entire machines mentally, testing them through thousands of hours of imaginary operation, identifying flaws and making improvements without ever putting pencil to paper. This ability, which he later called his mental laboratory, allowed him to develop inventions of staggering complexity. By the time Tesla arrived in America in 1884, he had already begun formulating ideas that would transform civilization. He worked briefly for Thomas Edison, but the two men clashed over fundamental approaches to electrical engineering. Edison championed direct current, a system that required power stations every few miles. Tesla envisioned alternating current, which could transmit electricity over vast distances. The battle between these two systems, later called the War of Currents, would determine the electrical infrastructure of the modern world. Tesla's alternating current system won. Today, it powers virtually every electrical grid on the planet. But this victory was only the beginning of his contributions to science and technology. Over his lifetime, Tesla held more than 300 patents. He pioneered wireless communication years before Marconi received credit for inventing radio. He developed the fundamental principles of radar decades before it became a crucial military technology. He demonstrated remote control of boats and vehicles at a time when such concepts seemed like pure fantasy. His laboratory in Colorado Springs, built in 1899, became the site of some of his most ambitious experiments. There, Tesla generated artificial lightning bolts over 130 feet long. He transmitted electrical power wirelessly, lighting bulbs that had no physical connection to any power source. Witnesses reported that horses in a nearby field received electrical shocks through their metal shoes, and that butterflies flying through the laboratory grounds appeared surrounded by glowing halos of electricity. Tesla claimed he had tapped into the fundamental frequencies of the Earth itself. He believed the planet acted as a conductor, and that by generating electromagnetic waves at precise frequencies, he could transmit unlimited amounts of power to any location on Earth without wires. He envisioned a world where energy would be freely available to all humanity, extracted from the environment itself. His financial backers, particularly the industrialist J.P. Morgan, were less enthusiastic about technology that would make electricity impossible to meter and charge for. As Tesla's experiments grew more ambitious, his claims grew more extraordinary. He reported receiving signals that he believed originated from Mars. He described hearing rhythmic pulses that seemed too organized to be natural phenomena. The scientific community largely dismissed these reports as the delusions of an overworked mind, but Tesla remained convinced he had detected evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence. His personal habits grew increasingly eccentric as he aged. He developed severe obsessive-compulsive behaviors, requiring that everything he encountered be divisible by 3. He refused to shake hands, terrified of germs. He developed an intense phobia of pearls, becoming unable to speak to any woman wearing them. He maintained an elaborate ritual for his daily meals, calculating the exact volume of every dish he consumed. He walked around each city block 3 times before entering a building. Yet through all of this apparent madness, Tesla continued to innovate. He proposed concepts that seemed like science fiction to his contemporaries but would later become reality. He described devices that could photograph thoughts. He outlined systems for transmitting images and sound wirelessly, predicting television and radio broadcasting. He warned of weapons that could bring down aircraft from great distances, anticipating anti-aircraft missiles and directed energy weapons. In 1895, a fire destroyed Tesla's New York laboratory, consuming years of research and countless prototypes. The loss devastated him, but reports from that period suggest something else happened around that time, an incident that may have affected Tesla even more profoundly than the fire. The accounts are fragmentary, pieced together from newspaper reports and statements from people who knew Tesla during those years. According to these reports, Tesla conducted an experiment involving an electrical device capable of generating several million volts. The experiment went catastrophically wrong. Tesla found himself caught in an electrical field of unprecedented intensity. Witnesses reported seeing Tesla's body surrounded by a blue-white corona of electricity. For a moment, time seemed to slow and distort around him. When the power was finally cut and Tesla extracted from the device, he was physically unharmed but mentally transformed. He spoke of an experience that transcended normal human perception. According to a reporter who claimed to have encountered Tesla shortly after the incident, the inventor described being able to perceive time as a physical dimension, as tangible as height, width, and depth. He claimed he had seen the past, present, and future existing simultaneously, like pages in a book that could be viewed all at once. The reporter, writing decades later, described finding Tesla in a small cafe in New York, visibly shaken. Tesla allegedly explained that the high-voltage field had affected the very fabric of space and time around his body. He spoke of seeing his entire life laid out before him, from birth to death, as a single continuous thread that he could observe from outside. He described glimpses of future events, technological developments that would not occur for decades, and visions of a world utterly transformed by scientific advancement. These accounts cannot be verified through contemporary documentation. No scientific papers from Tesla describe such experiments. No reliable witnesses came forward at the time to corroborate the story. Yet the tale persisted, passed along through the underground network of researchers and enthusiasts who studied Tesla's life and work. What can be verified is that Tesla's behavior and focus changed after 1895. He became increasingly interested in the nature of time and the fundamental structure of reality. His notebooks from this period contain cryptic references to temporal mechanics and multidimensional physics. He began speaking of forces that could affect not just matter and energy, but the flow of time itself. Tesla spent his final years working on what he called the teleforce weapon, a device that could project concentrated beams of microscopic particles at such high velocities that they could destroy aircraft, demolish buildings, or kill armies from hundreds of miles away. The press called it the Death Ray, a name that captured both the public's fascination and fear. Tesla claimed he had perfected the design and offered to sell it to the United States military for the purpose of national defense. The military showed little interest. By the 1940s, Tesla was seen as a relic of an earlier age, his greatest achievements decades in the past. He lived alone in a series of New York hotels, moving every few years when his debts accumulated too high. He fed pigeons in the park, particularly one white pigeon that he claimed to love as a man loves a woman. He continued to announce new inventions in press releases, but few took these claims seriously anymore. On January 7, 1943, a maid entered room 3327 of the Hotel New Yorker to clean and found Nikola Tesla dead in his bed. He was 86 years old. The official cause of death was coronary thrombosis. He died alone, as he had lived for many years, surrounded by papers and notebooks filled with diagrams and equations that few people could understand. The hotel staff notified the authorities. Within hours, representatives from multiple government agencies descended on the hotel. The United States was in the midst of World War II, locked in a desperate struggle against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. The government knew that Tesla had claimed to possess designs for weapons of extraordinary power. They could not risk those designs falling into enemy hands. The Office of Alien Property, a government agency responsible for seizing assets that might pose a security threat, took immediate custody of all of Tesla's belongings. They boxed up everything in the room: papers, notebooks, photographs, personal effects, and anything else that might contain information of value. They transported these boxes to secure government storage facilities, but simply seizing the materials was not enough. Someone had to examine them, someone with the technical expertise to determine whether Tesla's claims had any merit. The government needed a scientist who understood high-voltage physics, electromagnetic theory, and the kind of advanced electrical engineering that Tesla had pioneered. They needed someone who could separate genuine discoveries from the elaborate fantasies of an aging inventor. They found that scientist working at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of America's most prestigious research universities. He was a professor of electrical engineering, an expert in high-voltage phenomena, and the medical applications of radiation. His name was John George Trump, and his examination of Tesla's papers would add yet another layer to a mystery that was already becoming impossible to untangle. The choice of John Trump to analyze Tesla's documents would have been entirely unremarkable except for one detail. John George Trump was not just any government scientist called in to evaluate potentially dangerous technology. He was the younger brother of Fred Trump, a successful real estate developer in New York. Fred Trump had a son born in 1946, 3 years after Tesla's death. That son would grow up to build a real estate empire, become a television personality, and eventually win the presidency in one of the most shocking electoral upsets in American history. His name was Donald John Trump. The connection between the Trump family and the mysterious papers of Nikola Tesla was not discovered until decades later, when internet researchers began piecing together biographical details. The information was not hidden. It appeared in official FBI documents, academic records, and family histories. But no one had thought to connect these dots until the strange coincidences surrounding the Ingersoll-Lockwood books brought renewed attention to every aspect of Donald Trump's family history. What John Trump found in those papers, what he reported to the government, and whether any of Tesla's most sensitive research disappeared from the official record would become questions that echoed through the decades. The official story presented one narrative. The conspiracy theorists presented another. And somewhere between those two versions lay a truth that might explain why books written in the 1890s seemed to predict events that would not occur for more than a century. John George Trump was born in 1907 in the Bronx, the younger brother of Fred Trump by 3 years. While Fred would go on to build a real estate empire, John chose a different path, one that would lead him into the highest echelons of American scientific research. He attended the Polytechnic Institute of Brooklyn, then continued his studies at Columbia University, where he earned his doctorate in electrical engineering in 1933. His dissertation focused on high-voltage phenomena, making him one of the foremost experts in a field that few scientists fully understood. By the time World War II began, John Trump had established himself as a leading researcher at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He directed the radiological laboratory, where he developed medical applications for high-energy radiation. His work contributed to the development of radiation therapy for cancer treatment, technology that would save countless lives over the decades that followed. He also participated in classified military research, working on radar systems and other technologies crucial to the Allied war effort. John Trump was exactly the kind of scientist the government needed to evaluate Tesla's papers. He possessed deep knowledge of electrical engineering and high-voltage physics. He understood the theoretical frameworks that Tesla had pioneered. He had security clearances that allowed him to work on sensitive military projects. And perhaps most importantly, he had the analytical mind necessary to separate viable technology from unworkable speculation. The Office of Alien Property contacted Trump within days of Tesla's death. They explained the situation and the urgency. Tesla had claimed to possess designs for powerful weapons. The United States could not allow those designs to fall into Axis hands, nor could they ignore the possibility that Tesla's final work contained genuine breakthroughs that might aid the war effort. Trump agreed to examine the materials and provide an assessment. The documents filled approximately 80 trunks, a lifetime accumulation of notes, sketches, calculations, and correspondence. Trump spent 3 weeks reviewing the materials. He examined Tesla's claims about wireless power transmission, his designs for what he called the Teleforce weapon, and his various other inventions and theories. He considered the mathematical foundations of Tesla's work and the physical principles that would be required to make these devices functional. On January 30, 1943, Trump submitted his official report to the Office of Alien Property. The document, which would later be declassified and made available through Freedom of Information Act requests, contained Trump's professional assessment of Tesla's work. The conclusion was unambiguous and somewhat dismissive. According to Trump's report, Tesla's papers consisted primarily of speculative philosophy and promotional material. The designs and theories contained no new principles or workable mechanisms that would be of interest to the military or to scientific research. The Teleforce weapon that Tesla had promoted so vigorously existed only as a concept without practical engineering behind it. There were no revolutionary discoveries hidden in those 80 trunks, no secrets that would transform warfare or technology. The government could safely ignore Tesla's final work. The report effectively closed the matter. The Office of Alien Property retained custody of the papers for several more years before eventually releasing them to Tesla's family. In 1952, the papers were shipped to Belgrade, Yugoslavia, where they became part of the Nikola Tesla Museum. Researchers and enthusiasts could examine them, study them, and verify for themselves that they contained nothing of world-changing significance. This should have been the end of the story. A respected scientist examined the work of an aging inventor and determined that the claims were not supported by the evidence. The government accepted this assessment and moved on. Tesla's legacy rested on his genuine achievements in electrical engineering, not on the grandiose claims of his final years. But problems emerged with the official narrative, small discrepancies that grew into significant questions as researchers began examining the details more carefully. The first issue concerned the number of trunks. Official records from the Hotel New Yorker indicated that Tesla's belongings filled approximately 80 trunks when they were initially catalogued. But when the papers arrived at the Tesla Museum in Belgrade in 1952, only 60 trunks were delivered. 20 trunks had disappeared somewhere in the 9 years between Tesla's death and the transfer of his papers to Yugoslavia. The FBI consistently denied taking any materials beyond what was eventually released. They claimed that the discrepancy resulted from mistakes in the initial inventory or from materials that had been stored in other locations and were not part of the hotel room seizure. But no documentation exists to explain where those 20 trunks went or what they contained. The gap in the record remains unexplained. The second issue concerned the nature of Trump's review. 3 weeks seems like a remarkably short time to thoroughly examine 80 trunks worth of technical documents, especially papers written by someone as prolific and complex as Tesla. Some of Tesla's notebooks contained hundreds of pages of dense mathematical calculations. His correspondence spanned decades and included letters from scientists, inventors, and businessmen around the world. Could one scientist, however brilliant, truly assess such a vast quantity of material in just 21 days? Critics of the official story suggested that Trump's report might have been written before he completed his review, designed to provide cover while sensitive materials were quietly removed for further study. They pointed out that the United States government had every reason to conceal the discovery of advanced weapons technology, particularly during wartime. Revealing that America possessed Tesla's death ray designs would alert enemies to the possibility of such weapons and might spark an arms race in directed energy technology. The third issue involved Trump's subsequent career. After his assessment of Tesla's papers, John Trump continued to work on classified military projects throughout the war and into the Cold War era. He received numerous awards and honors for his contributions to science and national defense. In 1983, President Ronald Reagan awarded him the National Medal of Science, one of the highest honors the United States bestows on researchers. The citation praised his work in high-voltage phenomena and medical radiation therapy. But the citation made no mention of his review of Tesla's papers, despite that being one of the most historically significant tasks he ever performed. The omission seemed curious. Why would such an important evaluation not appear in the official record of his achievements? Was it considered too minor to mention, or was there another reason for the silence? Donald Trump spoke about his Uncle John frequently during his rise to prominence and throughout his political career. In interviews and at campaign rallies, he referenced John Trump's brilliance and their relationship. He mentioned his uncle's work at MIT, his prestigious awards, and his status as one of America's leading scientists. The references served to establish Donald Trump's connection to academic excellence and scientific achievement, countering criticisms about his own educational background and intellectual capabilities. In one particularly notable comment made during the 2016 presidential campaign, Donald Trump told an audience that his uncle used to tell him about nuclear technology before most people understood what nuclear meant. The statement was somewhat confusing, as John Trump's work focused on high-voltage physics and radiation therapy, not nuclear weapons development. But the comment suggested that John Trump shared complex scientific knowledge with his nephew, information that the young Donald may not have fully understood at the time but absorbed nonetheless. The relationship between the two men appears to have been genuine and close. John Trump attended family gatherings and maintained contact with his brother's children. Donald Trump was in his 30s when his uncle received the National Medal of Science, old enough to appreciate the significance of the honor. The family took pride in John's achievements, seeing them as proof that the Trump bloodline possessed not just business acumen but intellectual distinction as well. The question that conspiracy theorists seized upon was simple but profound. What if John Trump's report about Tesla's papers was not entirely truthful? What if he found something extraordinary in those trunks and reported otherwise to protect sensitive information? And what if he shared some of that knowledge with his family, particularly with his nephew Donald. The theory required several leaps of logic. First, it assumed that Trump lied in an official government report, a serious breach of professional ethics that seemed out of character for a respected scientist. Second, it assumed that he kept this secret for decades without ever revealing it, despite having no obvious motive to do so after the war ended. Third, it assumed that whatever he found in Tesla's papers related somehow to time manipulation or temporal mechanics, despite no evidence that Tesla had successfully developed such technology. Yet the theory persisted because it offered an explanation, however implausible, for the Ingersoll-Lockwood coincidences. If Tesla had indeed discovered something about the nature of time, and if John Trump had found evidence of this discovery in Tesla's papers, and if this knowledge had somehow been passed down through the Trump family, then perhaps the seemingly prophetic books written in the 1890s were not prophecies at all. Perhaps they were evidence of information flowing backward through time, creating a loop that connected the past and future in ways that conventional physics could not explain. The theory also gained traction because it connected to broader patterns that people claimed to see in Donald Trump's life and career. His seemingly impossible rise from reality television star to president echoed the unlikely victory described in Lockwood's book. His confrontational style and his ability to dominate media coverage, regardless of whether that coverage was positive or negative, suggested someone who understood the future trajectory of media and politics in ways that his opponents did not. Believers in the theory parsed Donald Trump's statements for hidden meanings, looking for hints that he possessed knowledge beyond normal human capabilities. They analyzed his business decisions, his political strategies, and even his tweets, searching for evidence of foreknowledge. Every correct prediction he made, every seemingly lucky break, became potential proof of temporal awareness. Skeptics countered that this approach represented classic confirmation bias. They pointed out that Trump made many predictions that proved false, many business decisions that failed, and many statements that contradicted his earlier positions. The theory worked only if one ignored all the evidence that did not fit and focused exclusively on the apparent hits, while dismissing the obvious misses. The truth about what John Trump found in Tesla's papers, and whether any of it related to time manipulation or was passed to his nephew, remained locked behind layers of classification, family privacy, and the passage of decades. Documents that might have provided answers were either destroyed, lost, or buried so deep in government archives that they might never surface. The mystery persisted not because evidence supported the conspiracy theory, but because the absence of evidence left room for speculation. What could not be disputed was the web of connections itself. The books existed. John Trump did examine Tesla's papers. Donald Trump did become president in circumstances that paralleled Lockwood's fictional account. These were facts, documented and verifiable. What those facts meant, and whether they pointed to something extraordinary, or simply represented the kind of random correlation that inevitably emerges from complex systems, remained a question without a definitive answer. The mystery would deepen further when researchers discovered that the Trump-Tesla connection was not the only apparent prophecy involving Donald Trump. Centuries earlier, another figure had made predictions that seemed to describe his rise to power with unsettling accuracy. The figure who had allegedly predicted Donald Trump's rise centuries before John Trump examined Tesla's papers, and long before Ingersoll-Lockwood wrote his mysterious books, was a French physician and astrologer named Michel de Nostradamus. History would remember him by the Latinized version of his name, Nostradamus. Born in 1503 in the south of France, Nostradamus lived during one of history's most turbulent periods. The Renaissance was transforming European culture and thought, the Protestant Reformation was fracturing Christianity, and devastating plagues swept across the continent, killing millions. Nostradamus worked as a physician during several plague outbreaks, developing treatments that were remarkably effective for his time. His remedies, which included cleanliness, fresh air, and herbal medicines, saved many lives when conventional medicine offered little hope. But Nostradamus would not be remembered primarily for his medical work. In 1555, at the age of 52, he published a book that would make him one of the most famous and controversial figures in Western history. The book was titled Les Prophéties, and it contained 942 quatrains, 4-line verses written in a mixture of French, Latin, Greek, and Italian. Each quatrain allegedly predicted future events, stretching forward in time to the year 3797. The verses were deliberately obscure, Nostradamus wrote in symbolic language, using metaphors, astrological references, and intentionally vague descriptions. He claimed this obscurity was necessary to avoid persecution by religious authorities who might view prophecy as heretical. The vagueness served another purpose as well, one that skeptics would point out for centuries afterward. It made the prophecies flexible enough to be applied to almost any significant historical event after the fact. Despite this ambiguity, or perhaps because of it, Nostradamus's prophecies achieved lasting fame. Interpreters claimed he had predicted the Great Fire of London in 1666, the French Revolution of 1789, the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, and the emergence of Adolf Hitler. They found quatrains that supposedly described the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the September 11th attacks on New York, and countless other major events of the past 5 centuries. The methodology was always the same. After a significant event occurred, researchers would comb through the quatrains looking for verses that could be interpreted as describing that event. The symbolic language allowed for creative readings. A reference to a great fire could mean a literal conflagration or a war. A king might be an actual monarch or any powerful political leader, or the Middle East. Critics pointed out that no one had successfully used Nostradamus's prophecies to predict a major event before it happened. The prophecies only seemed accurate when read backward, after events had already occurred and could be matched to appropriately vague verses. This pattern suggested that the apparent accuracy resulted from confirmation bias rather than genuine predictive power. Nevertheless, the prophecies retained their hold on the popular imagination. Each generation found new events to match with Nostradamus's verses, and new interpreters emerged claiming to have decoded the true meanings of the quatrains. When Donald Trump rose to political prominence, it was perhaps inevitable that researchers would search the prophecies for references to this polarizing figure. They found 5 quatrains that mentioned the word trumpet, or variations of it. The connection seemed tenuous at first. Nostradamus wrote in French and Latin, not English. The French word trumpet meant a literal trumpet, a musical instrument, not a surname. But in English translation, the word became trumpet, creating a linguistic bridge that allowed interpreters to connect the prophecies to Donald Trump. One of the most frequently cited quatrains described the false trumpet concealing madness that would cause Byzantium to change its laws. The imagery resonated with Trump's critics and supporters alike, though they interpreted it differently. Critics saw the verse as describing Trump's inflammatory rhetoric and his disruption of political norms. Supporters viewed it as predicting Trump's efforts to challenge and reform what they saw as a corrupt establishment. The reference to Byzantium changing its laws invited multiple interpretations. Some saw it as a metaphor for changes in American governance. Others interpreted it as predicting shifts in Middle Eastern politics, particularly regarding Syria and Turkey, regions that once formed part of the Byzantine Empire. The vagueness allowed the prophecy to encompass whatever political changes seemed most significant to each interpreter. Another quatrain described the great shameless one, bold, audacious talker, who would be elected governor of the army. This verse seemed to capture Trump's communication style, his willingness to make controversial statements, and his eventual role as commander-in-chief of the United States military. The description fit remarkably well, particularly the characterization of bold and audacious speech, which defined Trump's approach to political communication. A third verse referenced a bridge being broken and a city weak with fear. Interpreters connected this to political divisions in America, the metaphorical breaking of bridges between different factions of society, and the climate of anxiety that characterized American politics during the Trump era. The prophecy seemed to describe not just Trump himself, but the broader social and political effects of his rise to power. The prophecy that attracted the most attention described a figure who would emerge from obscurity, despite speaking softly while possessing great influence. The world would divide in its opinion of this figure. Some would call him a savior. Others would call him an architect of confusion. The description captured the essential paradox of Donald Trump's position in contemporary politics. Trump did emerge from relative political obscurity. While he had been famous for decades as a businessman and television personality, he had no political experience when he announced his candidacy for president. Political analysts dismissed his campaign as a publicity stunt. His speaking style, characterized by simple vocabulary and repetitive phrases, seemed unlikely to appeal to educated voters. Yet he possessed an undeniable ability to influence public discourse, to dominate media coverage, and to energize supporters in ways that conventional politicians could not match. The world did divide sharply in its opinion of Trump. In America and internationally, people viewed him as either a transformative leader who challenged corrupt establishments or as a dangerous demagogue who threatened democratic norms. There seemed to be no middle ground. Few political figures in modern history had inspired such polarized reactions. The description in Nostradamus's verse appeared to capture this reality with disturbing accuracy. Believers in the time traveler theory saw these prophecies as additional evidence supporting their broader narrative. If Lockwood's books from the 1890s seemed to predict Trump's rise, and if Nostradamus's verses from the 1550s also described him, then perhaps both represented glimpses of the same future, seen from different points in the past. The theory suggested that information about Trump's presidency had leaked backward through time, appearing as prophecies in multiple historical periods. The mechanism for this temporal leakage remained unclear. Some theorists proposed that Trump himself possessed knowledge of time manipulation, derived from his uncle's analysis of Tesla's papers. They suggested that Trump or others using this knowledge had traveled to the past, inadvertently leaving traces of information that appeared as prophecies. Others proposed that time was not linear but cyclical, and that certain events created echoes that rippled both forward and backward through history. Skeptics offered a simpler explanation. They pointed out that Nostradamus had written 942 quatrains covering an enormous range of topics using extremely vague language. With that much material open to interpretation, it would be statistically remarkable if none of it seemed to match any given prominent political figure. The same process of selective interpretation had allowed previous generations to find Napoleon, Hitler, and other leaders in the prophecies. Trump was simply the latest figure to be matched with appropriately ambiguous verses. The critics noted that other prophecies attributed to Nostradamus had failed to materialize. He allegedly predicted major catastrophes that never occurred, peaceful periods that turned out to be violent, and political alliances that never formed. These failed predictions were quietly ignored by believers, who focused only on the apparent hits while dismissing the misses. The linguistic argument against the Trump connection remained strong. Nostradamus wrote in French, not English. The connection between trumpet and Trump existed only in English translation. French speakers reading the original text would see references to musical instruments, not surnames. The connection depended entirely on a linguistic coincidence that existed only in one language. Yet the theory persisted, amplified by the internet and social media. Videos analyzing the prophecies accumulated millions of views. Discussion forums debated the meanings of individual verses. Each new political development was examined for connections to Nostradamus's predictions. The prophecies had become part of the broader narrative surrounding Trump, one more thread in a tapestry of apparent coincidences and mysterious connections. The psychological appeal of the Nostradamus prophecies was clear. They transformed chaotic political events into part of a grand design, a predetermined pattern that had been visible centuries earlier to those who knew how to look. They suggested that Trump's presidency was not a random occurrence, but rather the fulfillment of ancient predictions, part of a larger cosmic plan. This narrative provided meaning and structure to events that might otherwise seem inexplicable or disturbing. For Trump's supporters, the prophecies validated their belief that he was a uniquely important historical figure, chosen by destiny to transform America and the world. For his critics, the same prophecies confirmed their view that he represented a dangerous disruption, a figure whose rise had been foretold as a warning. Both sides found what they wanted in the ambiguous verses, demonstrating how prophecy served as a mirror reflecting the beliefs and fears of those who studied it. The connection between Nostradamus's prophecies, Lockwood's books, and the Trump-Tesla family relationship created a network of coincidences that seemed too elaborate to be purely random. Each element by itself could be dismissed as coincidence or creative interpretation, but taken together, they formed a pattern that demanded explanation, even if that explanation remained elusive. The theory had grown from obscure internet speculation into a widespread cultural phenomenon, discussed in mainstream media and debated in academic circles. It represented something larger than simple conspiracy thinking. It reflected a broader human need to find patterns in chaos, to discover meaning in seemingly random events, and to believe that reality operated according to hidden rules that could be deciphered by those persistent enough to look for the clues. Whether those clues pointed to genuine mysteries or simply to the human capacity for creative pattern recognition remained the fundamental question, one that the final connections in this elaborate web of coincidences would bring into even sharper focus. The accumulation of these coincidences, from Lockwood's books to Tesla's papers to Nostradamus's prophecies, created a narrative that seemed to transcend simple chance. Yet before accepting extraordinary explanations, it remained essential to examine what science and psychology revealed about how humans perceive patterns and construct meaning from random data. The human brain evolved over millions of years to detect patterns. This capability provided crucial survival advantages. Early humans who could recognize patterns in animal behavior, weather changes, and seasonal cycles survived and reproduced more successfully than those who could not. The ability to see connections between events, to predict what might happen based on what had happened before, became hardwired into human cognition at a fundamental level. But this pattern recognition ability came with a significant drawback. The brain became so efficient at finding patterns that it began detecting them even when they did not exist. Psychologists called this phenomenon apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. A related concept, pareidolia, described the specific tendency to see familiar shapes, particularly faces, in random visual data like clouds or rock formations. Apophenia explained much about conspiracy theories and seemingly prophetic coincidences. When examining large data sets, the human mind naturally gravitated toward elements that appeared connected while ignoring everything that did not fit the pattern. Given enough data points, some would inevitably align in ways that seemed meaningful, even if that alignment resulted purely from chance. The Lockwood books provided a perfect example. The texts contained hundreds of pages of material, most of which bore no resemblance to Donald Trump or his family. Giant turtles, underground kingdoms, battles with exotic birds, and numerous other fantastical elements filled the narratives. But readers focused on the name Baron Trump, the castle, the mentor named Don, and the description of the protagonist's intelligence and arrogance. These specific elements created a pattern, while everything else faded into irrelevance. The same selective attention applied to Nostradamus's prophecies. Of 942 quatrains covering every conceivable topic, researchers focused on perhaps 5 that mentioned trumpets or described leadership qualities that could be interpreted as matching Trump's characteristics. The other 937 verses, many of which described events that never occurred or could not be matched to any historical reality, were quietly ignored. The pattern emerged not from the prophecies themselves, but from the selection process applied to them. Confirmation bias reinforced apophenia. Once people formed a belief that these coincidences meant something significant, they interpreted new information in ways that supported that belief. Every Trump policy decision that seemed unusual could be reframed as evidence of foreknowledge. Every controversial statement could be seen as part of a larger pattern visible only to someone who understood the future. The theory became unfalsifiable, capable of incorporating any new data while rejecting any contradictory evidence. The internet and social media amplified these cognitive biases exponentially. In previous eras, someone noticing the Baron Trump coincidence might have mentioned it to friends, most of whom would have dismissed it as mildly interesting but meaningless. The idea would have died there, lacking the critical mass needed to become a widespread belief. But the internet allowed that person to find thousands or millions of others who found the coincidence fascinating. Online communities formed around the theory, members reinforcing each other's beliefs and collectively constructing elaborate narratives that no individual would have developed alone. The algorithmic nature of social media platforms accelerated this process. Systems designed to maximize engagement naturally promoted content that generated strong emotional reactions. Mysterious coincidences, potential conspiracies, and theories that challenged conventional understanding produced exactly the kind of engagement that algorithms rewarded. Content about the Trump time traveler theory spread rapidly, reaching audiences who would never have encountered it through traditional media channels. From a scientific standpoint, the theory faced insurmountable problems. Modern physics, despite enormous advances in understanding space, time, matter, and energy, provided no mechanism that would allow the kind of time travel the theory required. Einstein's theories of relativity permitted certain temporal effects, such as time dilation at high velocities or in strong gravitational fields, but these effects did not allow for traveling backward in time to alter past events. Quantum mechanics introduced even stranger phenomena, including quantum entanglement and the apparent ability of observation to affect particle behavior. Some interpretations of quantum theory suggested the existence of multiple timelines or parallel universes, but none of these theories supported the specific mechanism required for the Trump time traveler narrative, a person physically traveling to the past, influencing authors to write specific books, and then returning to the present. The Tesla connection, while factually accurate in its basic elements, did not bridge this gap. John Trump did examine Tesla's papers, but nothing in the declassified documents suggested that Tesla had discovered or developed functional time manipulation technology. Tesla's most grandiose claims involved wireless power transmission and directed energy weapons, not temporal mechanics. The theory required inventing an entirely new layer of secret discoveries for which no evidence existed. The missing 20 trunks of Tesla's papers represented a genuine mystery, but not necessarily one that implied exotic technology. Documents could go missing for many mundane reasons: bureaucratic errors, misfiled paperwork, materials stored in different locations and never properly reunified, or simple theft by collectors. The absence of these trunks proved nothing about their contents. Yet even after examining all the rational explanations, the psychological mechanisms, and the scientific impossibilities, something about the narrative continued to resonate. The coincidences were real, even if their meaning remained disputed. Lockwood did write books featuring Baron Trump in the 1890s. John Trump did analyze Tesla's papers. Donald Trump did become president in circumstances that paralleled Lockwood's fictional account. These facts existed independent of any interpretation placed upon them. The theory's persistence revealed something important about human nature and contemporary culture. In an age of rapid technological change, political upheaval, and information overload, people sought explanations that made sense of chaos. Simple coincidence felt unsatisfying. Random chance seemed inadequate to explain events that had reshaped the political landscape of the world's most powerful nation. The time traveler theory, however implausible, provided a narrative framework that transformed confusion into a story with structure and meaning. The theory also reflected changing attitudes toward authority and expertise. In previous generations, established institutions, scientific authorities, and mainstream media held greater power to define what qualified as legitimate knowledge. Fringe theories existed but remained largely confined to the margins of discourse. The internet had democratized information in ways that undermined traditional gatekeepers. Anyone could research historical documents, examine declassified files, and construct elaborate theories connecting disparate facts. The question of who decided what theories deserved serious consideration had become genuinely complicated. This democratization had both positive and negative effects. It allowed for the discovery of genuine conspiracies and cover-ups that established authorities had concealed. It gave voice to marginalized perspectives that mainstream institutions had ignored. But it also enabled the rapid spread of misinformation, the elevation of speculation to the status of fact, and the creation of alternative realities where evidence mattered less than the emotional satisfaction of believing in a particular narrative. The Trump time traveler theory occupied a unique space in this landscape. It was not entirely serious, yet not entirely joking either. Many who discussed the theory online did so with a winking acknowledgement of its improbability, while simultaneously expressing genuine fascination with the coincidences it highlighted. The theory functioned as both entertainment and as a vehicle for exploring deeper questions about the nature of reality, the limits of knowledge, and the possibility that conventional understanding might be incomplete. For some believers, the theory represented genuine conviction that something extraordinary had occurred, that the coincidences pointed to hidden truths about the universe. For others, it served as a playful exercise in connecting dots, a form of intellectual entertainment that challenged conventional thinking without requiring literal belief. And for many, it occupied an ambiguous middle ground where the line between serious inquiry and creative speculation blurred beyond recognition. The cultural impact of the theory extended beyond the specific claims about Trump and time travel. It became part of the broader mythology surrounding Trump himself, contributing to his image as a figure who transcended normal political categories. His supporters could point to the theory as evidence that even the universe seemed to have selected Trump for an important historical role. His critics could use it to illustrate what they saw as the conspiratorial thinking and detachment from reality that characterized his base of support. In the end, the question of whether Donald Trump was a time traveler admitted only one rational answer: almost certainly not. The weight of scientific evidence, the lack of any viable mechanism, and the more parsimonious explanations provided by psychology and statistics made the theory untenable as a literal description of reality. But the broader questions the theory raised remained valid and important. Why did these particular coincidences occur? What did their existence and the fascination they generated reveal about contemporary society? How should people evaluate unusual patterns of correlation in an age where information was abundant but truth often seemed elusive? These questions had no simple answers. The story of the Trump time traveler theory ultimately said more about the present than about the past or future. It illuminated how people in the early 21st century made sense of a world that seemed increasingly strange and unpredictable. It demonstrated the enduring human need to find meaning in chaos, to discover hidden order beneath apparent randomness, and to believe that reality operated according to rules more interesting than simple causation and chance. The books existed in the Library of Congress, available for anyone to read. Tesla's papers resided in Belgrade, open to researchers. The FBI files documenting John Trump's review had been declassified and posted online. Nostradamus's prophecies could be examined in numerous translations and editions. These were not hidden mysteries accessible only to initiates. They were public facts that anyone could verify. What people chose to make of these facts remained a matter of individual judgment. Some would see evidence of extraordinary phenomena. Others would see nothing more than the kind of coincidence that inevitably emerged from complex systems involving billions of data points. Still others would occupy the uncertain space between these positions, entertaining possibilities without committing to conclusions. The truth, as it so often was, resided somewhere in that uncertain space. Not in the literal claim that Trump traveled through time, which remained overwhelmingly improbable, but in the recognition that reality sometimes presented patterns that defied easy explanation, that history contained genuine mysteries alongside mundane facts, and that the line between meaningful coincidence and random correlation was not always as clear as rationalists might prefer. Whether future historians would remember the Trump time traveler theory as the amusing curiosity of the digital age or as the beginning of a deeper investigation into phenomena not yet understood remained to be seen. For now, it stood as a testament to human creativity, our capacity for pattern recognition both insightful and illusory, and our eternal fascination with the possibility that the universe might be stranger and more wonderful than conventional wisdom allowed. The mystery persisted, neither solved nor abandoned, waiting for whatever future revelations might shed new light on these curious connections between a Victorian novelist, a Serbian genius, a MIT professor, and a real estate mogul who became president. If the answer existed, it remained hidden in the spaces between documented facts and imaginative speculation, inviting each new generation to examine the evidence and draw their own conclusions about what it all might mean. For those who have followed this investigation from the beginning, from the peculiar books in the Library of Congress to the prophecies of a French astrologer, one thing has become clear. Reality is rarely as simple as it first appears. Whether these connections represent genuine mystery or merely the human tendency to find patterns in chaos, they remind us that the world contains depths we have only begun to explore. The invitation remains open to anyone curious enough to look deeper, to question assumptions, and to consider possibilities that conventional thinking might dismiss too quickly. The truth, whatever it may be, awaits those patient and persistent enough to search for it among the facts, the theories, and the enduring mysteries that continue to captivate our collective imagination.